Imagine stepping onto a massive wooden ship, floating in the dead center of the trackless Atlantic Ocean. It is completely empty, yet perfectly intact. The white sails are fully set, the wind is blowing gently, and everything on board sits in its proper place. The captain's personal journal lies wide open on his wooden desk. The crew's clothing is neatly packed away inside their travel trunks. There are 6 full months of fresh food and clean water stored securely in the dark cargo hold. There is no sign of a violent struggle, no bloodstains on the deck, and no damage to the ship's hull. Yet, there is not a single living soul on board. The entire crew, along with the captain's wife and his young daughter, have vanished into thin air. They did not leave a note. They did not leave a single trace. They simply stepped off the face of the earth, leaving behind a perfectly functional vessel to drift aimlessly through the deep blue sea. This is the terrifying reality of the Mary Celeste, the world's ultimate ghost ship, and a mystery that has baffled historians, scientists, and detectives for well over a century. Welcome to English Unleashed. I am Alicia, and this is the podcast where we explore the world's greatest secrets while building your English fluency. Today, we are diving into a chilling historical puzzle. What could possibly compel an experienced captain and a seasoned crew to abandon a perfectly safe ship in the middle of the open sea? Part 1. Out of New York Harbor. To truly understand this bizarre event, we must transport ourselves back to the late autumn of 1872. The Atlantic Ocean was a bustling highway of international trade, filled with merchant vessels risking the unpredictable winter elements to transport valuable goods between the Americas and Europe. Among these vessels was the Mary Celeste, a beautiful 2-masted brigantine commanded by Captain Benjamin Briggs. Briggs was not a reckless amateur or a desperate gambler. He was a deeply religious, highly competent, and widely respected mariner with many years of experience navigating the treacherous waters of the Atlantic. He was a man of meticulous, daily habits, known throughout the shipping industry for his sober judgment and steady hand. This specific voyage was meant to be a monumental chapter in his successful career, so much so that he decided to bring his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, along for the journey. Joining them on the ship was a carefully selected crew of 7 disciplined, experienced sailors who had worked together for years. Their cargo was massive and highly valuable, consisting of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol bound for the historic port of Genoa, Italy. On November 7, 1872, the Mary Celeste hoisted her massive white sails and glided smoothly out of New York Harbor, slipping quietly into the vast expanse of the grey ocean. For the first 2 weeks, the voyage seemed to proceed without a single hitch. Captain Briggs recorded regular mundane entries in his official logbook, noting the shifting winds, the exact coordinates of the ship, and the standard daily routines of life at sea. There was absolutely no indication that anything was wrong. Meanwhile, another vessel was preparing to cross the exact same ocean. The Dei Gratia, a British brigantine commanded by Captain David Morehouse, set sail from New York just 8 days after the Mary Celeste. Morehouse was a close personal friend of Captain Briggs, and the 2 men had actually shared a warm farewell dinner in New York just days before their respective departures. On December 4th, 1872, nearly a full month into their difficult journey, the crew of the Dei Gratia spotted a distant speck on the horizon, halfway between the Azores Islands and the coast of Portugal. As the two ships drew closer together, Captain Morehouse noticed through his telescope that the mysterious vessel was moving erratically. Her sails were slightly damaged, she was riding awkwardly in the freezing water, and she seemed to be drifting aimlessly with the ocean current, rather than following a straight, purposeful course. Morehouse hoisted coloured signals to communicate, but the stranger remained chillingly silent. No one appeared on the wooden deck, no one answered the flags. Sensing that a major disaster had occurred, Morehouse ordered a small boarding party of 3 brave men to row across the choppy waters and investigate. Part 2. The Ghost Ship. When the boarders pulled themselves over the heavy wooden railing of the silent ship, they stepped into a living nightmare of absolute stillness. They fully expected to find a horrific scene of carnage. They braced themselves for the terrible sight of a plague-ridden crew, or the bloody remnants of a violent pirate raid. Instead, they found a ghost ship frozen in time. The silence on board was heavy and oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic creaking of the wooden timbers and the splashing of waves against the hull. As the men searched the vessel from bow to stern, their level of bewilderment grew exponentially. Everything was completely normal, yet entirely empty. In the galley, the iron stove was cold, but there were ample provisions. The ship's food supply was entirely intact, with enough flour, meat, and fresh water to sustain a crew for another 6 months. In the crew's quarters, personal items were left undisturbed. Valuables, including cold money and expensive navigation instruments, were still sitting safely inside the sailors' lockers. If pirates had attacked the ship, they had inexplicably left all the wealth behind. In the captain's private cabin, the scene was even more haunting. The logbook lay wide open on the desk. The final entry was dated November 25th, nearly 10 days prior to their arrival. It put the ship's position near the island of Santa Maria in the Azores, hundreds of miles away from where she now drifted. The entry was written in Briggs' characteristically calm handwriting, detailing standard weather conditions. There was no mention of a storm, no hint of panic, and no sign of trouble. Part 3. The Missing Pieces. As the search party dug deeper into the physical layout of the ship, they began to compile a strange manifest of the missing. While the personal belongings and cargo were completely intact, certain critical items were conspicuously gone. The ship's longboat, a small wooden lifeboat used only for extreme emergencies, was missing from its iron davits. The essential navigation equipment, specifically the sextant and the chronometer, had been carefully removed from the captain's quarters. The ship's official papers, with the exception of the logbook, were totally gone. It became clear that the crew had not been abruptly wiped out by a sudden catastrophe on deck. Instead, they had made a deliberate, calculated decision to abandon the ship. They had gathered their navigation tools, loaded themselves into the tiny lifeboat, and pulled away from the massive, sturdy vessel. But why would an experienced captain like Benjamin Briggs order his crew, his wife, and his infant daughter into a fragile lifeboat in the middle of the open Atlantic Ocean? To abandon a perfectly safe ship is the ultimate sin in maritime law. It is a desperate last resort, reserved only for when a vessel is actively sinking, burning, or completely destroyed. Yet, the Mary Celeste was in excellent physical condition. There was a very small amount of water in the hold, which was perfectly normal for a wooden ship of that era, but she was fully buoyant and entirely capable of completing her long journey to Italy. The mystery deepened, threatening to defy all rational explanation. Part 4. Fact versus folklore. When the Dei Gratia successfully towed the empty Mary Celeste into the British port of Gibraltar, the maritime authorities were thoroughly perplexed. They immediately launched a rigorous forensic investigation, desperate to uncover the hidden truth behind the phantom ship. In the absolute absence of clear evidence, standard theories began to circulate through the public, each one wilder than the last. The first and most obvious theory was a pirate attack. The 19th century Atlantic was still home to ruthless privateers and desperate raiders. However, this theory quickly crumbled under the weight of basic logic. A pirate's primary objective is plunder and theft. Yet, the valuable cargo of industrial alcohol was entirely untouched. The personal valuables of the crew were left sitting in plain sight. Furthermore, a pirate attack would have left clear signs of violence, such as bullet holes, broken railings, or blood-splattered decks. The Mary Celeste was pristine. The second theory was a bloody mutiny. It was whispered in the taverns that the crew might have turned on Captain Briggs, murdered him and his innocent family, and fled the scene. But this theory also failed to hold water. Briggs was a notoriously fair and well-liked employer who carefully vetted his men before hiring them. There were no signs of a physical struggle on board, no weapons were missing, and no blood was ever found by the forensic investigators. More importantly, if the crew had mutinied, why would they abandon a perfectly good merchant ship to die in a tiny lifeboat? Other, more eccentric theories emerged from the public imagination, ranging from sudden attacks by giant squids and mythical sea monsters to outbreaks of madness caused by contaminated food. For decades, these sensational myths completely overshadowed the facts, turning the Mary Celeste into a legendary urban myth. Part 5. The volatile hold. However, if we look past the supernatural folklore and examine the subtle, physical evidence left behind in the hold, a frightening and realistic truth begins to emerge. The key to the entire mystery lies not in what was missing from the ship, but in the volatile, dangerous nature of what she was carrying. Remember, the Mary Celeste was transporting 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol. When the investigators in Gibraltar thoroughly inspected the cargo hold, they made a critical discovery that had been overlooked in the initial chaos. 9 of the wooden barrels were completely empty. The alcohol inside had leaked out during the rough voyage. This seemingly minor detail changes absolutely everything. Industrial alcohol is highly volatile, especially when confined in a dark, poorly ventilated cargo hold. As the ship sailed through the changing temperatures of the Atlantic, the leaked alcohol would have rapidly vaporized, filling the enclosed spaces of the ship with invisible, highly flammable, and toxic fumes. The air inside the hold would have become a ticking time bomb. Put yourself in the shoes of Captain Benjamin Briggs on the morning of November 25th. For days, the ship had been tossing and turning in rough seas. Below decks, the invisible vapor from the 9 broken barrels had been accumulating, building up intense pressure in the dark. Suddenly, a terrible sound echoes from the cargo hold, a loud, deep rumble or a sharp hiss as the built-up gas pressure pops the main hatch wide open. A foul chemical stench fills the clean ocean air. To a seasoned captain, this was the ultimate nightmare scenario. Briggs knew exactly what he was carrying, and he knew that a single spark, caused by the friction of the wooden hull or the striking of a match, could instantly blow the entire ship to pieces. He was trapped on a floating bomb, with his beautiful wife and his baby daughter. The psychological pressure in that moment must have been absolutely paralyzing. He did not have the luxury of time to conduct a thorough inspection. He could not afford to wait and see if the ship would explode. His primal instinct to protect his family and his crew completely overrode his years of logical maritime training. The invisible threat created an immediate, overwhelming panic. Part 6. The Tactical Trap. This intense psychological pressure triggered a frantic, split-second decision. Briggs ordered everyone to abandon ship immediately. But he did not intend to desert the Mary Celeste forever. He was far too smart for that. His plan was a temporary, tactical evacuation. He ordered the crew to lower the small lifeboat into the water. They quickly grabbed the navigation tools, the sextant and the chronometer, which would allow them to keep accurate track of their position. They did not pack heavy provisions because they truly did not expect to be gone for long. Everyone piled into the small boat: Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, little Sophia, and the 7 crew members, to ensure they wouldn't be separated from their floating home. They took a long, thick tow-line, a sturdy rope, and tethered the small lifeboat to the stern of the Mary Celeste. Their plan was to float safely a few hundred feet behind the main ship, out of the blast radius, waiting for the toxic fumes to clear from the hold. Once the danger of explosion passed, they would simply pull themselves back along the rope, climb aboard, and resume their journey. It was a logical, albeit desperate plan, born out of extreme fear. But the ocean is a cruel and unforgiving master, completely indifferent to human plans. As they floated behind the Mary Celeste, disaster struck with terrifying speed. The weather in the Atlantic can turn in an instant, and a sudden violent squall began to stir the waters. The wind howled, and the waves grew dangerously high. The massive Mary Celeste, with her sails still fully set, caught the sudden gust of wind and lunged forward with immense force. The small, fragile lifeboat was violently tossed in the churning wake. The heavy tow-line, strained to its absolute limit by the opposing forces of the 2 boats, grew taut. In a sudden, heartbreaking moment, the rope snapped. The sound of the parting fibers must have sounded like a gunshot over the roar of the wind. Within seconds, the psychological trap snapped shut. The crew in the lifeboat could only watch in absolute horror as the Mary Celeste, their sanctuary, their only hope of survival, caught the wind and began to sail away from them. She was perfectly stable, entirely safe, and completely out of reach. The very ship they had fled out of fear was now deserting them. Left behind in a tiny, overcrowded boat with no food, no water, and no shelter, the crew was completely at the mercy of the vast, freezing Atlantic. They were swallowed by the ocean, leaving no trace behind, while their empty home drifted on for days, a preserved monument to their panic. Part 7. Shadows on the Wall. The tragedy of the Mary Celeste is a profound meditation on the nature of human fear. The ghost ship is not a supernatural myth, nor is it a tale of violent malice. It is a preserved testimony to how easily the human mind can be manipulated by a perceived danger. The crew did not die because their ship was sinking. They died because they believed it was going to explode. They fled an imaginary catastrophe, only to walk directly into a real one. In our daily lives, we often face our own invisible fumes, threats that seem overwhelming and terrifying, causing us to panic and abandon our stable foundations. The story of the Mary Celeste serves as a haunting reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thing we can do is let our fear dictate our direction. The ship sailed safely across the ocean, completely unharmed, while the people who built her, sailed her, and loved her were lost to the deep, victims of a shadow on the wall. Thank you for listening to this episode of the English Unleashed podcast. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to follow the show so you never miss our weekly journeys into history's greatest mysteries. Before you close this video, remember your fluency training. Do not just listen to this story once, listen a second time to catch the specific vocabulary and phrases you missed. Listen a third time to shadow my voice, speaking the words out loud along with me to train your accent. Keep listening, keep practicing, and keep moving forward. You do not need perfect English to speak. You just need courage, practice, and a clear path. Until next time, I am Alicia. Bye for now.